recording now? Beautiful. So this is just how I do it. This could be set up however you like. I tend to like having my edit window on one side and I can see the mix on the other. But when you're doing real gritty editing, then of course you don't need your mix, so you can just double click and just work in your edit. So what we're going to do is literally click and drag these into the session, but we'll do it in order. So right now we're going to create tracks first. So I just want to make sure you have that. And let's go back to Pro Tools. So we're going to begin by adding a track. So I'm going to teach you the shortcut. That's what I have written down. The long cut is you go up here to Track and New. Or as you can see, the hotkey is Control-Shift-N. We start here. We're going to have one, and we're going to click New and make that stereo. Go next to Track Type. Click to Master Fader. That's going to be everything, so we want it in stereo. It's named Master. Let's hit the plus sign next to it. And now we're going to add another stereo. This one we're going to do aux input, that stands for auxiliary. And this is what we're going to then rename, you can double click that, and call it submix. So go ahead and hit create. You can see that they populate top to bottom on the edit window and left to right on the mix window. So now we're going to adjust the timeline. Next to the tempo, if you click and pull that over, what you do is you start adding bars before the track starts. We're going to zoom in now. If you hold Alt and scroll up, you zoom in. Scroll down to zoom out, holding Alt. And it'll always go where your cursor is clicked. To scroll sideways is holding Shift, up to left, down to right. This gave us a little bit of pre-roll before we got into measure 1, right? I think it's a little bit easier, and we want to start right at measure 1. So that's that, zooming out, holding Alt. In my version, which is the full version, I have something called markers down at the bottom. Your version is at the top. It'll be up here. Do you see something that says markers? Yeah. So lining up with 1, hold the window key. You get a plus sign. Click. And we're going to name this intro. This is how we're just going to label the song as we go through with all the different parts there. Okay, so now we're going to bring in our first sample. So if you go down to your file folder and you open that one up, we're going to be looking at the Titan vocoder loop 1. It's bold on your sheet. It's going to be this one down at the bottom. Now, is your file open in front of the Pro Tools like this? Okay, because that's going to make it much easier. Grid mode. So grid is going to keep us in the time code exactly. Slip is going to be free form. There's time and place for that, but for what we're doing here, grid is going to be all day. At this point, and this is kind of the thing, is by putting it in grid, we're going to be able to pull this sample in right away and line it up at 1. Even if you're not directly on it, that's okay, because we can easily fix it. So once you're highlighted here, hold Alt and zoom in. It'll always zoom to the beginning of the region. This is a region, also a clip. Region is its official title. All right, so then if you double click that name, you can change it. So let's call this one intro loop. Now the next thing we're going to do is, if you notice, now this is what's cool about this company, is that they labeled what it is. It gave us the beats per minute and the key that it's in. And that's important because it's going to help us be able to line up the key much easier. Otherwise you have to sit down at the piano, find out what key it's in, remember that, you know. So because we're using this one, we're going to stay in D sharp minor and 100 beats per minute. So now we're going to change the time code to fit this loop. So if you double click the red diamond, this gets us to the tempo change. Because our loop is 100, let's make the tempo 100. Did yours end up being perfectly between measures 1 and measure 8? Or does the sample actually bleed over?
Over.
It bleeds over?
Yeah.
Okay. So what you're going to do is go up here to the trim tool and right click. TCE is to time stretch. So you see that little clock? To the right side of the file, right of the region, you see the little clock? If you click, you can pull it and drop it to where you want it to be. In our case, you want to make sure that it's hitting at the end of 8, just going into 9. You can see up here, the length will show you 8 bars exactly. Good point. So what we were talking about was, of these 3 tools, do you see a crossbar up there that highlights all of them? It calls a smart tool. You can use all 3. So if you're at the bottom, you get the hand tool. You can click and drag around. If you go up to the top in the middle, you get the highlight tool. At the end is how you get your cropping or your trimming. So the standard is just going to be a plain old crop. You can highlight and delete, get rid of sections. Control Z to undo anything. So when your samples were bleeding over, you went to TCE, you clicked, right? And you drag it in to line up there. And what it does is it scrunches the entire file down. This does affect the sound, so the longer you stretch a file, the more distorted and not useful it becomes. But in these cases, we're doing small adjustments so they sound okay. So now we've got the first bit. Let's move on. We're going to change the grid to eighths. So in mine, it's going to be right here. Yours is different, and I might have to show you. It's like, you see where it says grid, it probably says it like down here.
Yeah.
Next to that, I think is a quarter note beat. To get these options, you choose eighth note, and then you should see these lines, and within 1 bar, you'd have 8 segments. Cool?
Yeah.
This is going to make it easier for us to adjust because we're not going to do anything more than that. Okay, we're going to add the drums now. Back to the file folder. We're going for shuffle full drum loop. This next one here. Click, drag, you'll see it populate, and this one we're going to line up at 5 and drop. So now we want to stretch this one. We're in the TCE tool, and we're going to click and pull this one to make it longer. So if we want now, we could hit it from the beginning. We clicked here, hit play. And then conveniently at measure 5. Let's bring the Dubstep Riser in now. The nice thing about all this is it's extremely repetitive, so like once you do it a few times, it's exactly the same process over and over. So we're going to pull this one to measure 7. Make sure you're in grid mode. And then we're going to TCE this thing down to measure 9. So it was this really, really long riser, but for us it's going to be much shorter. Again, when you're highlighted on there, if you hold Alt, you can zoom in, holding Shift and scroll over. So we want to look at the end here. You see we're measure 8, beats 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let's go back to the trim tool, right click to go to standard. So we're doing kind of compositional thing where we're going to have the beat kind of rise up and then give us a moment of silence before we drop the verse. So on the top, the intro loop, click that and crop it down to 8/4, measure 8, beat 4. If you want to pull them around as well, you click the name, and then if you pull up, you can see where it's showing you that little gold line. That's to move it around. So this one, if you double click, if you get the full drum shuffle, I'm just going to call that drum loop. And the one underneath it is our new riser, so I'm going to double click and call that riser. Again, I'm kind of just putting this in the line as we go, as we're adding them, but you know, if I'm doing something like this, I'll have my drums as like one whole section, my bass is a different section, you know, kind of orchestrate it. All right, so with the cursor, click at measure 9, just kind of freely, holding Alt to zoom in. We've cut off measure beat 4, measure 8. The drums we're going to pull just a little bit, halfway, so you'll get the downbeat of 4, but then not what follows. And then for the riser, do the same thing, standard trim tool, and drop that at measure 8, beat 4. Oh, let's add a click so you can prove that this is actually in time. Go up to track, down to click track, You guys are familiar to the metronome. Yep. So I'm going to click and drag that to the top so it's out of the way. So we're not going to have the click on while we're working, but you could hear how it was actually right in sync with the track. This M button is to mute. So again, I just show you how to add the click so that you know it's there, and that's a part of the entire experience. Back to the Dubstep Riser, and click the file. In the notes, I use something because the full program has an actual pitch shifter plugin, but the demo does not. So here's how we're going to get around it. You can see that this riser says it's in G, but we're doing this loop that's in D sharp minor, so we need to change the pitch. So if you go to Audio Suite, you should have time shift, I think is what yours is called, and then pitch shift. This one's called time shift, so they flipped it. So we could change the speed of it here at the time, but we're not going to do that, so we're going to leave it at 100, and we're going to go to the pitch and transpose by semitones. Semitones are the chromatic scale. So because we're in D sharp and we're coming from G, it looks like I have this to go -4 semitones. So you can pull it down, but I think that's inaccurate. So double click and do -4, enter. So we go down from G to F sharp, F, E, D sharp, and we'll hit render. If it were a plugin, then it'd be something that could just sit and we could always play around with it, but this is going to be how this file will always be now. So now we can play it again, and it's very subtle, but the riser is now in the same key.